Hi there, it's Kristen from k.becca, and in this video I'll be taking a look at some of the new products that came out for the Heidi Swapp Minc earlier this year. There are a bunch of new foils, including 2 new ombre foils. This is the silver and aqua ombre foil, and there's also a pink and gold one. Next is gunmetal, which is sort of a warm silver with a touch of rose gold. They also introduced matte champagne, which is, I think, the first matte foil in the Minc lineup. When you compare it side by side to the Minc gold foil, you can see that the champagne has a more pearlescent type of finish, which is a nice option if you want something that's less shiny and a bit more subtle. And last but not least, there are a couple of colors that I know a lot of us were hoping to see: a black foil and an opaque white foil. Minc also introduced some new reactive mediums, and the great thing about these is that you don't need a laser printer to use them. Today I'll be testing out the Reactive Mist and the Reactive Paint. They also released art screen ink, along with a bunch of art screen designs that you can use with it, but I haven't picked those up yet. I have my Minc up to temperature at setting number 4, which is my go-to setting for foiling most projects, and now I'm going to test out the Minc Reactive Mist. I have a sheet of scrap paper under the area where I'll be spraying, and there is a non-stick craft mat underneath that to protect the surface. You can also use an empty cardboard box and spray into that to protect your work area from glue spray. I'm holding the tag about 4 or 5 inches from the spray bottle, and you can see when I make the first spray that it's actually more of a stream than a mist. So the resulting spray is heavier in one central area, but it's liquid enough that you can move and angle the tag and it will slowly run in that direction. I'm spraying a second tag here and holding the spray further away from the tag, probably 8 to 10 inches, which makes the spray a little more tough to control, but gives lighter coverage over a larger area. There are even some areas where it looks more like a mist, with smaller droplets. After I'm finished spraying this tag, I'll set both of the tags aside to dry. You want to make sure that the mist is dry before running it through the Minc. If it's still wet, then it can seep out from the surface that it's sprayed on and ruin your transfer folder, or even worse, seep out of the folder onto the rollers inside the Minc. Don't ask me how I know. While the tags that I sprayed with the Reactive Mist are drying, I'm going to test out the Reactive Paint. The paint comes in a tube, and I'll be using an old paintbrush to work with it. I'll squeeze a little bit onto a piece of scrap paper, and you can see that it has the consistency of a thick glue, rather than the consistency that I think of when I think of paint. The reactive paint starts to dry pretty quickly, so I only squeeze a little bit out at a time. Because the paint is thicker than the mist, you don't need to wait until it's completely dry to run it through the Minc. However, if you want to be able to see more of the brushstroke texture when your piece is foiled, use less of the paint so there's lighter coverage when you paint it onto your tag, and allow the paint to dry for at least 5 minutes so it has a little bit of time to firm up. If you foil it right away, there's a chance that some of the paint could seep out onto your transfer folder, and the final result will have a more flat look because the rollers in the Minc will press onto the paint as the piece is being foiled and spread it out. When I'm finished using the paintbrush, I'll immediately place it into a container of water that I have off camera so the paint won't dry on it. And to be safe, I'm using a piece of folded paper as a transfer folder so it's no big loss if it gets some paint on it. I cut a piece of Minc gunmetal foil that's a little bit larger than my tag, and I'll place that over the area of the tag that has been painted and run it through the Minc using the folded paper transfer folder. I really like this brushstroke look, and the areas where the foil creased a little bit over the painted area have a really cool modern look too. Next, I'm going to use the Reactive Paint with a stencil, and you can find this stencil die cut in the Skinny Stencils Set 1 die cuts in the k.becca shop. I'll have a link to the product in the area below the video. I'll place the stencil over the tag where I want it, and then I'll squeeze out a bit more paint and use my paintbrush to paint over the stencil area. I tried to use a pretty light touch when painting here to help prevent any of the paint from seeping under the stencil. After I'm done using the paintbrush and stencil, I'll place both in the container of water that I have off camera so the glue won't have a chance to dry on either of them. This time, I cut a piece of the matte champagne foil to a little larger than the area where I painted, and I'll run that through the Minc using the folded paper transfer folder. After I peel the foil off, you can see that there were a couple of areas where the paint seeped under the stencil, but I actually think that in this case it only adds to the funky modern look. I also like that some areas of the stencil shapes didn't get any paint coverage, which gave the finished foiled tag some additional texture. Now that I'm finished doing preliminary testing, I'm going to foil this set of print and cut gift tags. When foiling print and cut pieces, foil everything before you cut it with your die cutting machine. I talked more about this in a previous video, and the link to that should be popping up right about now. Long story short, when peeling a print and cut piece from a die cutting mat, it can cause some of the laser toner to flake off, leaving you with less than great foiling results. If you foil before you cut, then you avoid this. Another thing to keep in mind when foiling a print and cut piece is that you want to cover the registration marks before you run the cardstock through the Minc, because the Minc is hot enough that it remelts that toner, which will stick to your transfer folder if you don't cover those areas. Remelting is great when it's on an area that will be foiled, but not so great when it marks up your transfer folder. But just in case you do get toner marks on your transfer folder, the plastic ones at least, you can put some rubbing alcohol onto a cotton ball and rub those areas right off. I'm just using a couple of strips of regular printer paper to cover the registration mark areas, and I've cut pieces of the gunmetal and matte champagne foils for the individual tags. After I run the sheet of tags through the Minc, I'll remove the strips of paper from the registration marks and the foil from the words, and you can see how nice the results are. Now I'm going to cut the tags using my Silhouette Cameo, and I'll see you back here after for the next step. Okay, so the tags are all cut, and I'll be using the Reactive Paint and some additional foil to finish them. For the first tag, I'll be using the same stencil from before. I'll place the stencil over the tag where I want it, and then I'll brush over it lightly with some of the Reactive Paint. I cut a piece of matte champagne foil to cover the painted area, and while I'm running that through the Minc, I'll paint some brush strokes onto another tag and get that ready to foil with the gunmetal foil. Because I made sure that the paint coverage was pretty light on these tags, I only let them dry for a minute or two before running them through the Minc. I was really happy with the results, but just keep in mind that if you have heavier paint coverage, it's best to let it dry so none will seep out when it's being run through the Minc. Lastly, do you remember the tags that I sprayed earlier with the Reactive Mist? Well, I thought that they were dry, so I ran one through the Minc, and guess what? It wasn't completely dry. Well, at least this is the perfect opportunity to show you what happens when the spray isn't dry. Yeah, you pretty much ruin your transfer folder. Thankfully, none of the spray seeped out of the folder, and I was able to peel the tag off of the transfer folder, aka the folded piece of paper. The results actually weren't too bad at all, but you can see where the spray that wasn't dry basically steamrolled out to the edges of the tag when I ran it through the Minc. I'll try to be more patient next time and will undoubtedly have better results. I hope that you enjoyed this video, even though my impatience got the best of me there at the end, and that you've been inspired by seeing some of the things that the Minc Reactive Paint and Reactive Spray can do. You can find a full list of supplies used in this project in the description area below or in the area below the video if you're watching this on k.becca.com. And if you liked this video and would like to see more Minc foiling videos, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you'll tune in again soon.